Hi there, everyone. You're very welcome. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat, where I am in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So just type in your name and let me know where you're from. And just let me know if the sound is okay, because I know the intro seemed very, very quiet. Hi, Stephanie. Lovely to see you again from Utah, and Sherry from New York. Vanna. Hi, Floriana. Ciao. And Ben from St. Lucia. Oh, lovely. And Kathleen McGowan from Illinois. That's wonderful. And ciao, Vanna dalla Roma. And Sylvain. I sound perfect. Oh, thank you. That's lovely. And Jos from Minnesota. These names are flying now. And I don't know how to pronounce your name, from Cornwall. Lewin. And hi, Tara. Again from New York. It's lovely to see familiar names. And ciao, Valentina. Hi, Red. Lovely to see you here. And Patrick from Michigan. Heidi, lovely. Howard, lovely to see you. And somebody from Whitley. I don't know where Whitley is. And Sandra from New Brunswick. Great. Canada. And Pauline O'Moroe in England. It's lovely to see you all. And should I say good evening to you if you're from this part of the world, and good morning or good afternoon. And I just want to say we've been enjoying really, really lovely weather here in Ireland. It's rare, and we have a nice weekend of good weather forecasted, which is just great and exciting. So we're going to the US today. We're going to California. Let me introduce you to my guest this evening is Larisa White. Larisa, you are so welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Eimear.
So I just want to let you know that Larisa is this year's Mount Hemus Scholar. So she is our 23rd Mount Hemus Scholar. And she's written a ginormous book, I can see there, which we'll be referring to a bit later. And one of, I think, the chapters is her Mount Hemus lecture, and it's titled World Druidry, Seasonal Festivals in a Globalizing Tradition. So it's well worth it. It's up on the website, and hopefully when we can meet physically, that we will have a Mount Hemus session, or somehow to be able to hear you deliver it in person, or if not, maybe online. Who knows? So you are in California. So I was just mentioning the weather. You're all wrapped up, and California is noted for its droughts, etc. And here I am in my summer clothes. So what's going on?
I think what's going on is the norm, compounded by global climate change. So California is not uniform in its climates or its weather. We have very intense microclimatic variations. They say if you don't like the weather, if you travel 5 minutes, you can be in an entirely different environment. Where I live is in the mountains, in the Coast Range Mountains, just south of San Francisco, along the coast. And our house is situated near the top of the second hill from the coast, in a gap that channels the ocean breeze through to the bay. And so in the summer times, starting about beginning of May, there's a summer high pressure system that pushes the surface water off of south from us, and it lets this icy cold water bubble back up. And then as the wind passes over it, it turns this icy fog and rushes inland. And so at the gap, we feel that quite intensely. But what's interesting is the hotter that it gets in the inland valleys, the more intensely the fog pushes in and stays, and the further it goes in. So as global climate change has been making the summer temperatures rise and rise, in the Central Valley this last week, it's been 115 degrees Fahrenheit frequently. Where we are situated today, for example, we're expecting a high of 63 Fahrenheit. So it's about half. I don't know. It's much, much colder. In fact, we get much warmer temperatures in the beginning of March and mid-March, and we enjoy warm, sunny weather through April. And then it actually has been given a name by some Twitter sphere people. But I don't like their name. They call it Carl. I like to call it Kermit the Fog, but it's the great fog bank of summer that keeps us moist and cool. And that's fact. Stop me if I go too much, but that fog is the reason why we have the coast redwood forests here. And the range of the coast redwood forests actually used to be much further inland. And it's receded back. And I'm seeing a pattern that I predict, and you'll let me know in 1,000 years if I'm right, that as global climate change warms the planet, our fogs will become more prevalent and more cooling, and we'll see the redwoods march back inland a little bit, maybe one hill more. So they tend to be on the coast side of the next range over. And then in the valley between our side and that other side, we have mixed evergreen forests that are predominantly the coast live oaks, which are not oaks in the sense that you might be familiar with, these big, tall, majestic trees, these gnarly things with the branches that sweep down. I think Errol Flynn in Robin Hood, he danced about in the coast live oaks.
I remember him.
Yeah.
And I loved him as Robin Hood. That's how old I am. Okay, go on.
And if you go just a little bit farther, either to the hilltops or a little bit farther inland or away from the gap, you get bunch grasslands, which is populated by these magical creatures, which are not beautiful in a greeting card sense, but they're beautiful in that one grass plant can live 50 years and send roots 20 feet down into the soil. And so each year when the drought comes and they die back, they slough off these 20-foot roots, which then make the fungal layer go so deep so that they can support the oaks through the 7-month drought of the summer. So it's very magical. And then there's the wildflowers that grow among those bunch grasses. So there's all those ecosystems right where I live. It's very beautiful.
That sounds fascinating. I mean, my brother lives in San Francisco, and I was there many, many years ago, 23 and a half years ago. It was January. And we went to Yosemite and everything was covered in snow. I'm just fascinated how you describe. It's like I want to go there. I don't know if we'll ever be able to travel, but it just fascinates me. I in my mind, I have this picture of these hill ranges and how it changes as you move along. And I'm fascinated that you say that as global warming increases, that will benefit the redwoods in terms of their existence.
That's a theory. Yeah. I could be wrong. 1,000 years from now, I'll know. Otherwise, I'll be forgotten. But it's on the record. So if I'm right, I'll be the new Nostradamus or something.
I would say she was right all along. But what it is fascinating. When we talk about climate change and we talk about the destruction and the impact that will have, and then there's that fear that we're going to destroy the planet, and I think we may not be far off with that, but how other parts of nature can benefit from a certain change while others don't. I just think that's interesting. It gives me a little bit of hope.
There's a fascinating book that I've been just finished reading. It's by Peter Wohlleben, who wrote The Secret Lives of Trees. He's written one more recently called The Secret Wisdom of Nature.
Okay.
And each of its chapters talks about the complexity of interactions within a little climatic ecosystem, right? And how we have no idea what we're doing, really. It's like conservation efforts, maybe we're messing it up for somebody we don't see or don't notice.
That's right.
So I think the focus needs to be that it's global climate change and not even global warming everywhere. It's global warming on average. Some places will be warmed ferociously, and some will actually become cooler and damper. So that's still, there's so many questions.
Mm-hmm. It's Marcus Ballonis, who was my guest last week. He has comment, beautifully described. What are some of the names for the areas you mentioned so I can look them up and dream of visiting?
Oh, I want to ask for a little bit more of a question. Do you mean the town names or the names of the ecological systems? Can you add possibly?
I imagine it's the latter, but put it in, Marcus.
Yes.
I imagine it's the latter.
So for the ecological niches, there's the coast redwood forest, which is one.
You said location names.
Location names. So where the coast redwoods that I am closest to are coastside south of Half Moon Bay on the peninsula, and then there's another grove that I love to go to when we can travel in the Humboldt County, which has the groves that this is one of my sacred places I like to visit. So that forest, the old growth parts of that forest have been redwood forest since 66 million years ago. So think as the dinosaurs were dying out, this forest was there as forest. Some of the individual trees were alive at the time that the pyramids were built there, at the time that Skara Brae was built, right? So these trees have such ancient memory of some kind, very alien memory, but so that's a magical place I like for the redwoods. For the mixed evergreen forest, there's a beautiful location near us called Crystal Springs, which is a valley that was flooded to make a reservoir for our region, but it has all the mixed evergreen forest, and it has the oak trees, and it has understory of beautiful flowering shrubs. It will have things like toyons, which they're actually what Hollywood was named after, because they have these medium green serrated leaves that were reminiscent of holly.
Okay.
And they have red berries, right? Similar in look to the holly berries. But in the summertime, midsummer, they flower white like hawthorn. So that's one of our beautiful plants. And there's wild lilacs that fill that space. And coast silk tassels, which are one of my favorites. We've actually bred a set of female plants, which is rare. But these are small trees or shrubs. They're evergreen. They grow to be about 25 feet high, and they make these, where am I? This big, these 8 to 10 inch long tassels of tiny flowers during the rainy season. They're in full flower at the end of January, beginning of February, that when it rains, they look like icicles hanging. So all of these beautiful plants that many of them dying out because of postage stamp lawns and artificially imported non-native plants, but the natives are really lovely.
Zane Cooper says, in San Francisco East Bay, we have a lot of chaparral areas with toyon, manzanita, oaks, and horse chestnuts.
We have no horse chestnuts where we are, but we do have some manzanitas. There are several hundred subspecies that are specifically evolved for their different microclimates around. So we have some of those growing here. They make a lovely jam, if I leave you any. So,
it's interesting. Normally, I kind of envy, because I love where I live and my own climate and the trees. I would say, oh, pity you don't live here. I'm now feeling a little bit of landscape envy and tree envy. I'm just conscious of this now. Oh God, I would just love to visit. And it's really interesting, because normally I think, oh no, I am just here in bliss in my landscape, blah blah blah, and I'm just listening to you, and you're kind of making me, oh, I'd like to move, not live, but just to visit.
Visit, but when you visit at your worst season. Because if you come in this, everyone wants to come to San Francisco in the summer, and everything's going drought deciduous. The landscape's dying. There are no flowers. It's cold. It's terrible here in the summertime. If you come in February, you will see the explosion of the shrubs in flower. So that's a better time to come, and you'll want to be away from the ice, I think, at that time.
Yeah, it was January, so I was in Yosemite in the snow. and that was fascinating. Actually, Stephanie says that's how we feel about where you live. We're okay. Well, you know, we have this expression: "Kerry cows have long horns," or "Far away hills are green." But I loved being in Yosemite. Now, that was a short time with snow. You know, if it snows here, we have a crisis. You know, how we manage, we don't deal with it very well. And we have a lot of Polish people living here who kind of go, "Why are you whinging? You just get a shovel and you deal with the snow." It's like, oh, we don't know what to do. And even though we're getting, I don't know, we had hardly any snow this year. It's a big event.
Yeah, snow
lasts for 2 days.
Snow doesn't come here. My son bemoans the fact regularly. He wants to move someplace where he could walk out his front door and play in the snow. So we usually, somewhere around midwinter, we take when we can travel. Mount Shasta is this holy mountain in the north end of our state, which has a glacier forever on the top. Beautiful, beautiful mountain. And so we go and visit the snow there once a year.
Has the snow on Mount Shasta changed in terms of diminished?
It has, but that mountain makes its own weather. It is an inspirited place, and it makes its own weather. And one of the delights of being up there is you can watch from the fireplace right inside your window. You can watch the breeze start blowing, and it suddenly there's clouds forming on top of it. It creates these lenticular clouds that just drop every bit of moisture right on top. Wow. So it does a very nice job, though I think it's not been as much snow in recent years as it once was.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking you, I went to Kenya first in the 1980s, and you could see Kilimanjaro, you know, which is on the border of Tanzania and Kenya. And if you Google Kilimanjaro, you see a typical snow-capped mountain. But when you actually go there, there's very, very little. When our kids, I don't know if you know, I've been taught in Tanzania for 20 years, and we used to take, Howard and I would take the kids there. We had a house there. And when we were driving towards Moshi, where you see the mountain, it looked like a polar bear. So it had a bit and legs. So my son used to call about the polar bear, which is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So I'm really interested.
Oh my!
When you say the Mount Shasta generates its own, it's inspirited and generates its own weather. I think it's beautiful.
But it must be less than before. I mean, there's only so much moisture in the clouds. I've seen the same thing. When I was a child, my family lived in Iran, in the mountains north of Tehran for a few years. And that was a snowy, forested wonderland with these incredible rivers and streams tumbling through the rocks. It was magical, magical place. And I recall it being extremely wet and green and lush and snowy. And I've since looked at the sort of the Google Earth over that same landscape, and it is brown, barren rock. It's the drought and climate change hit there maybe 20 years ago. It started being really intense. And it's a little disturbing to me to see how far the change has taken us already.
Zane Cooper says, Ella Young formed the Order of Shasta, Shasta being one of the 4 jewels sacred areas she described in California. Zane, I'm interested, do you mean Ella Young, the one who's written the Wonder Tales about Finn McCool? That's interesting. Were you aware of this, Larisa?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. It's always interesting, people's comments, and I'm sorry if I don't get to acknowledge all of your comments as we're talking. Otherwise, we'd never manage to have a conversation. But it's really lovely when our viewers do join in the conversation. Nancy West makes me want to travel to CA2 to California as well. Yes, Zane says it is the same writer. Okay. Is she American? I always thought she was English in some way, but anyway. That's fascinating.
There are many myths about Mount Shasta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have one to tell us?
I'm not very good at the lore up there. That's far for me. So it's more of a pilgrimage site than local connection. But it was, I recall, a meeting place for several of the indigenous peoples of California and Oregon would come and meet there. So, excuse me. Yeah, I'm looking at I have to turn off the comments. You'll have to tell me what to do. Otherwise, I'll get them.
Gordon Cooper says, Young did Yeats' Golden Dawn rituals on California beaches. Okay. And then she looked for UFO. Oh, this is really interesting. She looked for UFOs on Shasta.
Probably because the lenticular clouds look very much like UFOs. Classic flying saucers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, what brought you to druidry?
That is actually a rather long question. It happened in phases.
Go on.
I suppose it depends on whether you're talking about what brought me to the label of druidry or what brought me to the practice of. Because the practice for me came many, many years earlier, before I realized there was a word to describe what it was I had done. So I was raised to be a solid, loyal, devoted atheist. Science was the way. I was doing my doctorate in engineering and public policy, very, very, very stable and stressed out. I took this magical escape there before 9/11, before all of the chaos of our world. There used to be an opportunity. It was called courier travel, where the airlines, companies that needed to send packages abroad quickly and speedily, would buy out places on standard commercial flights for the cargo. And at a very inexpensive rate, they would sell off just the seat. So, and they needed somebody in the seat in order to use the cargo space. So if you were willing to either pick the date and let them pick the location, or you pick the location and they tell you when you can go, if you went with yourself and your carry-on bag, you could get a very inexpensive flight anywhere in the world.
Ooh.
And so this is probably the most reckless thing I ever did. You've asked about this before, but so I was stressed out and I knew I needed a mental health break. So I called my doctorate, my thesis advisor, and I said, I'm going away for the summer. And she said, okay, well, in case we need to reach you, where? And I said, the point is you can't reach me. I don't know where. I'm just going on this date. I'll be back in a certain time. And they sent me to London. And I had no place in mind where I would stay or what I would do when I got there. So on my way to the airport, I picked up a guide, which I was thumbing through on the flight. And I set off on this adventure through Britain, figuring I would sleep on a park bench if I didn't find a place to stay the first night, and then I would figure it out. And so I went in youth hostels, and I started in London, and then I went to the Southwest, and then I went up to Orkney, and I wandered about. And on my way, traveling to see archaeological sites, because atheist, non-spiritual person here. My dad was an architect, so I was always interested in the buildings, right? The churches, the I was planning to head west to see some of the architecture out there, and I met a woman in a youth hostel who also wanted to go. She wanted to go to some place called Glastonbury that I'd never heard of, but was willing to split the cost of the car rental with me. So sure, we rented a car and off we went. And in Glastonbury, just after leaving the Chalice Well, I had an experience, something like clairaudience or I don't know, clairsentience moment, like a sudden knowing. It was an experience of a life in the earth and something alive up very high. And I didn't know what it was. And at first I thought I was having a nervous breakdown because, the stress. I sort of sat and meditated on that for a while, started, questioning the air. Who that, who's that? What are you talking about? Am I going crazy? What's going on? Nothing, heard nothing. I had the message that regardless of whether or not you can believe the images of God that you have been presented, it does not mean we don't exist.
Wow.
And that's it. That was the sum total of it. And so I sat with that for a long time and got nothing. So off I went, continuing my trails. And when I was up in Orkney, and I can't remember exactly where, we might have been coming back from visiting the Ring of Brodgar somewhere up in there, but there was a cliff down to the ocean. I had another something coming from the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
That told me that I would see the end of my stress, that it would go away. Okay, so now I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm not, but if this is spiritual, you need to tell me what to do. And I got nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I started reading. That was 1994, and I just started reading world religions. Like, okay, maybe I'll find it somewhere. I don't know what it looks like, but I'll recognize it if I see it. But those moments left me absolutely sure that the world was not an object, that suddenly I was absolutely certain that the world was enspirited and worthy of respect and reverence and attention,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that as a scientist, I had not paid it other than an object for study. It was this resource to be used. And so I began trying to develop a practice that would demonstrate more a reverence and a kind of reciprocity and honoring, and mostly feeling my way blindly through that. And it was many, many years later, I picked up Michael Greer's Druidry Handbook. Was the first time I saw the word druidry, and it was connected with all these things that I had been doing and developing as a practice. Not the Ogam, that one was new to me, but there were so many elements of how he described druidry that rang true. So that's how I sort of came to the label. And during the time of all of these readings, my husband and I had also been working on this ecosystem restoration project on our land, which really started from being overwhelmed by the water bills for the garden. And we realized, nature had put something here before we came, and we should figure out what that was and put it back, because it should be easier that way.
Instead of all this watering. Yeah.
And so we had been doing this intensive, we have a third of an acre in the hills, and it had all the wrong things, and they were dying and they were diseased, and trees were dropping these giant limbs into our yard. And we thought, okay, we've got to put back what was here. And so we worked on that for about 17 years over time. And as that was happening, like all of these endemic animal species that we hadn't seen started nesting here, and we started seeing the seasons, which we didn't think existed here, because you don't see the seasons in the imported plant. You only see it when what belongs here is thriving. And so that also helped really connect me with the landscape here, and all of that. And so then when I finally saw Greer, and Greer's like, oh, plant some trees. I'm like, did that 200 times. Okay, now, what's the next thing? And then I just decided I needed to learn more. So I joined pretty much all the major orders. I joined the OBOD, I joined AODA, I joined ADF, I joined the British Druid Order. I joined them all and started studying all of the different curricula to try to sense what's the similarity, what's the differences, what speaks to me, and all of that. And so, and of course that led to the book. It led to the book because there was so much diversity. I was thinking, is there really such a thing as just a druid? Like, is there anything in common with all these different groups and their different takes on it? And so it was really only when I completed the research for the book that I realized, no, this is really my spiritual home. I definitely fit within that broad umbrella of the sort of the commonalities of druidry. So there you go. Long story.
Oh, it's wonderful. Just to your book, what was it that stood out for you in your? I'm sorry, Marcus says, What amazing experiences. The hairs on the back of my neck all stood up and cheered in the joy of your magic. What a lovely thing to say, Marcus. Yes.
Thanks.
A lot of people are commenting on what a beautiful story you're telling, or your story is such a beautiful one. What has jumped out in terms of your research what surprised you?
Honestly, what surprised me was how many people everywhere really root their druidry in nature.
Mm-hmm.
I was expecting rather more diversity depending on which order, which curriculum of study. Most of the curricula spend a lot of time, especially early on, teaching specific ritual forms and ritual symbolisms for meditation. And for me, that often failed entirely because they're based on the agricultural cycle of Britain.
Yeah.
And if you have an ecology that works at least similar to that, you can make tweaks and that feels right. But when you live in a landscape that has the seasonal cycles that we have here, which is entirely different, it's more driven based on water and moisture and not on light or dark or hot or cold. Those written rituals and symbolisms, they don't make sense. They don't work. And so I was rather expecting to find that, well, you're sort of like a druid, but since your landscape doesn't match, you're really keep moving, keep looking. But what surprised me was not just people in, the Brazilian rainforests or the deserts of the Southwest or even California Coast Range did this wildcrafting where they're really looking at their landscapes and celebrating what's there. But I was finding people in, northern Scotland were also making adjustments and saying, well, the wheel is sort of like that, only, the winter's much longer and the birds that migrate come back at a different time. And so even there's adjustments to the dates sometimes that are made to, so it's really coming out of nature and that connection that's really everywhere and very much uniting people. And so what inspired me was the sense that there's this community of druids that are perfect ambassadors for their landscape, who can teach the joy and the love and the passion about their area, their piece of the world and what's beautiful and worthy of remembrance in that place. I found that tremendously inspiring and uplifting. And the second thing was really to see how many druids really use creative artworks of various kinds to express that joy and reverence for their land. They're not just making fan fiction off the latest sci-fi novel, right? They're celebrating what is beautiful in nature. And I think that I just feel such joy to feel like I'm part of a community where that's the emphasis.
That's wonderful. Just one of the things that a few people have expressed to me, how do we get young people involved in druidry? And there are too many silver-haired people coming to the gatherings at Glastonbury. Not there's too many, but not enough younger ones. And I thought, but when I've traveled to other places, I've been to New Zealand, there were young people there, and there were people from Australia who were younger, the same in when I went to Germany in 2019, and the same in the US. And then I'm looking at, on page 18, you have a graph there, and it's like it represents the bell curve, the normal curve, so that you have the majority are middle-aged. Well, I don't know what a middle age is. For a long time, middle age was the age of my mother. She's now 85. So can you speak to that? What did you find?
I think that it's important to be aware of the differences between stories of a small group that's self-selected from a local area, and the patterns in a very large global database. And the discussions, I've heard the similar kinds of things about what the limitations are and who is or isn't showing up, and what the beliefs are. And I think it's easy to go into a group of people locally, listen to what you hear, look at what you see there, and assume that that's representative of the broader world. What I noticed in a lot of the responses to the surveys is that there were many people that wished they could participate in some kind of group, but they couldn't find anybody. And many people expressed that they had been following a druidic path for 10 or 15 years before they were able to find a group of people that were local enough to them that they could regularly get together and celebrate or discuss. So I think what you're seeing is that the younger people haven't yet found those local connections because they haven't been around long enough yet. And also the online communities have made it feasible to feel part of a community through an online connection, but then those people might be very far geographically. So you've made a connection and a sense of community, but it's not local. And so you're still not showing up physically at a local, even though you might be part of a community. So I think there's a lot to be gained from physical proximity. But even where I am, it's very difficult to find a sufficient number of druids to come together in one location. We had one gathering a few years back in the redwoods at Humboldt redwoods, and we had about 7 people, but we spent a year trying to find 7 people who could travel to the same place to be together, right? So I think it's a challenge, but it doesn't mean they're not there. It just means they're not able to be, at Stonehenge on the solstice, or wherever it is that the meeting is taking place. So,
when I joined, I didn't know anybody, and I had this notion that I didn't like groups, so I was quite happy to be a solitary druid. I mean, I've made a liar out of myself, but anyway. So I didn't know, and so Howard and I set up, this is my late husband, we set up a grove here because I was working with a number of our viewers will have heard the story before, a traditional healer called Shaban Kalula from Tanzania. He really encouraged me. So the summer I joined OBOD, I joined in August, so I got the Equinox ritual book, and we were running the 3 of us were running a workshop. It happened to be at the Equinox weekend, and I thought, oh, why don't we run this with the participants, do this ritual? And it was beautiful. And he said, this is a key, because he knew I was going to be getting a ritual for each of the 8 festivals. He said, this is a key and you need to do them in this place. If you don't, it's like a key in a lock. If you don't use it, the lock will get rusty. So he, in a sense, gave me permission. So we had that one. And then for Samhain, we had 4 people. The other 2 weren't druids. It was myself and Howard. And then gradually people came. And so for many, many years, so it's since 2003 we've been running these, the majority aren't OBOD members. And I think it's only in recent years that OBOD members have been coming, that people travel a bit. So I understand that difficulty. And it was needing a community. And now I have a lovely community here. It's druids and not. But it's people who have a resonance, or find a resonance with the ceremonies, who find a resonance with the Wheel of the Year, and like the space that we've created. So, and then I've been really touched by how important the online ceremonies that we've been doing from the orders, from the order, how that has reached out to people, and also these chats and the teas that for many, many people who are isolated. And I started in 2011 going to the gatherings in Glastonbury. And then I discovered a new home and a new community, and discovered actually I do like groups. And so that was my view of OBOD. That's what the order meant, until I went to different countries. And then I realized, there are different OBODs. You know, it manifests itself in different ways. And of course, that's part of the richness and the wonder of the order, that people are free to express their druidry in so many different ways. Zane says, the framework is helpful for me because I can adapt it based on the nature of my local environment and the arts and creative works. In the time during and after COVID, I miss is physical connection with others, and online connections are beautiful, make me log for more. And then Mark Rhodes Taylor says the online ceremonies have been amazing. I think they're very, very important. And I had a solstice one physically here, and I think, well, we don't know how long restrictions will be lifted for, but certainly for the rest of the year, we'll continue them online. And I know there's a need for people to have that online connection, and they work really well. I'm really surprised. But that challenge to have a physical one.
I think there's room for both. I think that supporting people who haven't not yet found a local community or have not had time to try to build one, it's very important. It's very difficult to keep your momentum up when you feel like you're the only one walking the path. And it's really nice to sort of look to your sides, even metaphorically, and know that there are other people exploring similar things and attempting those same connections.
And we started with 3 people, 4 people. That was it.
I think once COVID is over, we'll try to start up things on the peninsula again. I have a dear mentor. Name is Malcolm Brown, who lives on the Isle of Wight, and he once told me that if you want to start a successful group, you must first pick a place that really speaks to your heart, and you must be very happy having a solitary picnic on that hilltop by yourself in the rain for many years before people will start really knowing that they will come. So I think that may be part of it, right? It just has to be the thing that is always there.
And I think that's what I did here. You know, it was a garden, and then it became a sacred place. And that's what Shaban was saying, you've got a key. And I know when you continually run ritual in a place, it becomes more energized. It grows. You grow it, and you co-create it between the two of you. It creates you, and you create it. Oh my God, there's so many questions now. Zane has a question for you, and this is one of the questions I asked, but since he's asked it, what is your interaction like with the ancestors of place, like the local ancestry where you live?
That is a very wonderful question. The indigenous peoples of this area who lived on this land before we did were the Ohlone, California. And one of the things that's helped me begin to understand them as ancestors, well, 2 things. One is that there is a group of people who have opened up pre-COVID, I hope it's still there post-COVID, but a little 1 day a week Ohlone cuisine cafe at the back of a bookstore near Berkeley, where they're trying to revive some of the indigenous culinary arts based on the naturally growing works. And while I was there, I found a book that was written a while back called The Ohlone Way, that talks about what historical information there is about how they lived and what it was like. And I find that reading that helped me have a better sense of sort of being able to look at the hills, and rather than seeing all of the modern buildings, I can sort of in my mind's eye see what might have been here before, see which animals would have been here before, see where that landfill wasn't but was actually sort of a reeded wetland area, and sort of envision that the native peoples here didn't farm, they didn't make pottery, they didn't make permanent buildings, because this landscape was so incredibly rich with game and with berries and with seeds that they went from harvest to harvest to harvest to harvest throughout the year. And so they would build these basically this dome-shaped little huts that they would thatch with grass, which of course would decay in the rain. So it disappeared. to stay there for the duration of what the shellfish harvest, or for when they were dealing with the salmon harvest, and then they would move up into the hills when the wildflowers were seeding, and they would gather the pinole, right? And then they would move up into further into the hills and over into the valleys for the acorn harvest. And so there weren't these objects. And so the Europeans coming up in here said, oh, what useless waste of people. They don't do anything. It's like, oh no, they live really very well. And one thing that excited me as I was reading about it is that my family celebrates flower season. And what we read in that book was that it was tradition when the wildflowers finally hit their bloom, that the entire tribe would head up into the hills and grab and fling handfuls of flowers at each other. They had their own flower festival at that same time. So we don't in any sense try to become Ohlone, but we try to learn what we can about the landscape and about which plants are to be honored here from reading what we still know of the way they lived.
Alessandro Gagliardi says it will formally reopen in November at the University of California, Berkeley's Hearst Museum. Thank you for that, Alessandro.
Thank you.
This reminds me, so these were hunter-gatherers. And the interesting philosophy about hunter-gatherers is that the mother will provide. So the land always, we have everything we need around us. So we can move for the salmon, we can move for whatever it is, but we don't have to control anything. It's just such the opposite. We've kind of got farmer mentalities that we need to sow, reap, plant, and store, and all of that. That with the hunter-gatherer outlook, it's that the mother provides absolutely everything. It's all around us, and it's in some ways that's so freeing. Unfortunately, I don't think we can get back there yet. It would be lovely to, but
too many people.
But that was just a wonderful. So Zane says some of the roundhouse circle stones are still in place around Mount Diablo, along with stones with cupules used for grinding.
Very good. There are some of those in one of the places we like to go hiking up on Russian Ridge. They have a place where these beautiful moss-covered boulders, and then there's this another fallen boulder with a flat surface with all these little holes where they used to grind their acorns. It's all an acorn-rich area, and so there's one of the places they would go to do their acorn grinding. What I found interesting about what they spent their time doing, not planting so much, but practicing becoming one with the prey. So they talk about becoming like the deer. They would actually wear deer heads, but then they would practice the movement, style, and pacing of the deer, so they could walk within the deer and be shoulder to shoulder with their prey, grazing, heads down, until they found the one, and then they would very quickly dispatch that one quietly so as not to frighten anybody else, and let the herd move on. Or it's just a very interesting way of being. It's really becoming one with
That's right.
everyone else who is around you at the time. Yeah.
That's beautiful, beautiful. Adina Black says, here in Arizona, the indigenous folks are still here, and it's very clear that their ancestors are not my ancestors. I'm a colonizer, and it's very important to have my own relationship with the spirits of the land, and it is not the same. She says, it's important to stay grounded with my ancestors in Britain and Japan. Can you comment on that, or?
Oh, I think she's spot on. Like I said, you don't try to become a wannabe Indian, but if you're living in the land and you want to be respectful of the land, it's hard to look for the European immigrants and find out how to be respectful of this land, because they haven't been, right? They've really decimated it. So when we first moved here and started trying to figure out what should be on our land, we're looking around the neighborhood, and there were some old gnarly oak trees here that spoke to some of what might have been here, but that was it. And they were lonely. And it wasn't until we went into some of the protected wild spaces and started looking around for what were the other things that would have been here. But still, it's hard to know what was and what wasn't unless you read about how the indigenous peoples used to live. And then you can start seeing, okay, what are the plants that were here? What were the creatures that interacted with those plants? What were the things that fed the soil so that the soil can build the mycorrhizae that will protect the oak trees during fire season? You can't really learn that unless you can respectfully study and learn from the ancestors of place, right? Not that they're my ancestors, but they have the wisdom of this place and we don't. So no, I think this is a very, very important point.
Neil Pitchford, hello Larisa and Eimear. My first experience of connection were on the local spoil tips from coal mines in my area. That was really interesting.
Want to hear more of that?
Yeah, because I would imagine, you know, I would think myself, I wouldn't go to a coal mine for that. And I'm fascinated because, you know, we have different landscapes resonate differently, you know, with us. And I'm a green tree person. Okay, I like that. I've lived in a desert. I found it challenging. So my preference is for trees and river. I like the sea, but I don't want to be near this. I don't want to live near the sea. I want to be inland where the trees are stronger and taller and greener and all of that. So it's really interesting how landscapes call to you.
I'd like to say to Neil, I know where you live. I'm coming for that story later. So be prepared. I'm fascinated.
So when would you say druidry has supported you?
I think it's really the sense of community.
Yeah.
It's the sense of that I'm not the only crazy person who high fives my trees and, you know, congratulates them on the good floral display and cheers on. I have like outside this spring, we have I've lost my words right now. The bird that makes the noises like everybody else, mockingbird. Our local mockingbird, who we've named Frankie after Frank Sinatra, has an amazing repertoire. And he started not only learning, but teaching his kids to sing the song of the automated water sprinkler system and a car alarm. Very distinct, and you can hear in the early morning, way too early. Here's the grown-up telling it. No, it goes like this, and the little kid going, no, and call and response. They're funny people. What was I even answering? Sorry, I have the bird in my head now. So,
when has druidry supported you?
Where did that come from? Sorry.
I think it's wonderful. I mean, I've heard, I know mockingbirds, but I haven't had stories I haven't heard stories about mockingbirds. That's beautiful.
I'm not the only crazy one. That's where it came from. And also just even, for example, when I was starting the World Druidry Project or thinking about it, I had these questions. I wasn't even aware that the Mount Haemus papers were there yet until I was in the Druid Network forums at the time. And I go to all the forums. And someone said, oh, you should go to OBOD. They've got this program. Maybe you could do a paper on that. But there's always been this sense of anyone has a good idea. Recently, a woman in my community has lost a father, and everyone came to her aid, offering up ideas for prayers and ceremonies and bits of things that they've used as people pass on for use in her family. So there's always this sense of people rushing to come in and encourage and support and celebrate the learning that goes on. So
that's how it supported you. Wonderful. Yeah. Do you have I think we have, a rich well of supports in terms of meditation or a word look. Yeah, Mark Rhodes Taylor has just echoed what I've said. It's wonderful that as druids that we have that in our, and I'll say in our toolkit to be able to support people in times of crisis. I think that is beautiful, and I'm sure many religious groups have that. It's not just peculiar to druidry, but it's wonderful that we still have that too. And coming from a non-dogmatic point of view, but it's something that is offered, in a spirit of openness. I think it's wonderful to be able to do that. Neil comes back. Most of my recent ancestors were miners, so the connection was initiated by them and the local spirits of place, I believe, as a result of the scarring of the land caused by their activities. Okay. Wonderful. So do you have a personal daily practice?
I do. It's in the mornings, usually before breakfast, out in my garden, as long as there's no smoke. I have a few morning prayers that I say to the land, sea, and sky, gratitude. I have I call it the prayer to the kindred, but it's a poem that I wrote, sort of inspired by a tradition of the Thanksgiving prayer that's common among native tribes here, but it's not like theirs, but inspired by the idea that each morning you go out and you recognize the other than human beings who people your world and who are doing their hardest to keep the world going and thriving, and just recognize them and thank them for being there. And I do a series of meditations, which it's three. There are three short meditations, and the first one is the light body exercise, actually. But then I have extrapolated and created a similar. I don't have names for them. They're just me. But I do something that's akin to a stone body or an earth body. I have a visualization of the starlight coming in with that golden shimmering light, which is the light body. But then I also have a sense of earth, of Mother Earth being this giant, stable, rock solid hearth with an eternal fire within. So for me, that's the idea of the eternal hearth, and I try to draw that sense up into myself. So I, in some way, I begin to feel like a mountain of stone with a fiery heart, to try to think about how I can be the stable, comforting influence. And then the third one is actually sort of a fluid. I visualize, I don't know if it's air or wind or water, but it's a blue swirliness that I draw in to try to remind me to stay adaptable and flexible and not too rigid. So there's that trying to bring those three together and hold them at the same time so that I can keep those qualities to work with from the day.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love the solidity of the earth, and then the meanderiness and the going with the flow of the water.
Yeah, for me, threes work better than fours, and I find that all of those counterbalance the others. And if too much of one, you get a little bit crazy. So
that's wonderful. So what are you most proud of in your life? I don't know if it's the book or what has been your greatest achievement?
I would say it is the book, but it's not just the book. I mean, that was probably the largest academic project that I've ever done single-handedly. I've run projects where I've had, a dozen people working for me, and the results were big, but as something that I really undertook myself, that was the biggest piece of work. But what I think the biggest achievement for me was it drew together many learnings from many different parts of my life that had been these desperate bits. And a lot of them were things that if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I regretted the waste of time and energy that I put into those moments of my life. I'd wished them away. I have degrees in engineering that I never used, right? But they left me profoundly numerate and able to program a computer.
Okay.
So when I needed, so the data set that I got for this book was unbelievable. So most of the professional software that's used to do mixed methods analysis can handle about 1/10 of the amount of data that I ended up with. And so I kept crashing the programs, and I'm calling tech support and they're saying, "Oh, can't help you. You have too much, you can't do that much data." I'm like, "Well, I have it. So now what?" So that engineering degree that I never used allowed me to program something that would wrangle this enormous data set, right? So suddenly this regret is useful. And then I had all that wandering around in my childhood. Right? So my father designed airports. So we're constantly moving around the world, living between cultures, trying to navigate the differences. And, that enabled me to figure out what questions I needed to ask or how to ask them in a way that would be open to all varieties of druidry, to people from different world cultures, and to get it translated into different languages so that, knowing that it had to be polite in all languages, not just technically accurate, right? So that part of my life brought in. And I think it was that integrating of all these different pieces of my experience that made me feel like I was finally bringing my whole self to one project. And that, to me, I think is an achievement.
Wonderful. Julia Foyle, your experiences were all leading to this point in your life. Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting how early experiences and where they take us to, or how they have been a good foundation for something new later on.
It may be intended, or it might be a psychological choice to try. There's always multiple ways to look at a situation, right? And it's easy to get caught up in the frustration and the anger at wasted time and the regrets about the bad things, rather than looking at them and saying, okay, this sucks, but what am I learning about this? And let me keep my eyes and ears open for an opportunity to make good on what's salvageable about whatever that experience was. And that's hard to do. I don't do it well all the time, but every once in a while you find the way to do it. And I think it's a worthy goal to strive for.
I think that's wonderful to hear you, reframing regrets into something that actually is a resource. And I think that's I think a really healthy, but also a very reassuring way of engaging with life and your life experiences, is to turn regrets into, or could be regrets, reframing them into something else. I think that's beautiful.
It's a challenge.
Indeed. So, I don't know, another question I ask, what is the biggest challenge you've had that you've overcome?
Rootlessness, I think.
Okay, tell me more. This is interesting.
Well, it comes back to Dad with the airports. We lived all over the world as a child. We moved in and out of neighborhoods, in and out of schools, in and out of different curriculum in the schools, in and out of languages, in and out of holidays. And even when we returned to a place that we'd been to before, it might be in a house on the other side of town. And so you're not even returning to those people.
Yeah.
And I think always moving about like that, I never had a sense of belonging in a place. And funny story, when I was in graduate school, I spent 4.5 years in Pittsburgh, one location, 4.5 years. It was the longest I had ever been in one place contiguously at a time. And I thought, wow, I finally, I know where home is. This is great. And then I moved to California, after graduation, and I got that terrible question that people always ask you. Why do they ask you this? Where are you from? So I thought, great, I have an answer. Oh, I'm from Pittsburgh, and they like, oh yeah, great. Do you remember where that McDonald's was? It was about 20 years ago on the corner of, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not from Pittsburgh. It failed me again. And it really wasn't until we did our 17 years of ecosystem restoration here. And we planted trees, we planted 1 gallon pot seedlings of all of these trees and shrubs, and watching them now, they tower over me in some places, and my child is climbing them, and knowing the patterns of the fog and knowing how to recognize the seasons and how they change. And I think that really, finally, now when I go away and come back, I feel this immense homecoming when I reach this landscape, because I know it and it knows me in some sense. So I think
this is beautiful. Sylvain has a lovely, I'm just going to put it up. Such motivation and awe pouring from Larisa and her story. Thank you for this wonderful gift. And I echo that.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
And just to get back to Neil, our miner, sometimes processes need time to manifest themselves within us, and usually at their speed, in my experience. Indeed. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So what are you grateful for now?
Right now?
Yeah.
I am grateful for Peter, my husband, and Stephen, my son, because they are the kindest souls you have ever met.
Wonderful to hear that.
I am crazy, volatile, emotional, passionate. I get grabbed by my work. I get bandied about, and they don't care. They love me. They shower me with support. They bring me coffee. They're just delightful, supportive people always. And next here out, I'm grateful for Frankie, the nightingale. Not the nightingale. I keep
mockingbird.
The mockingbird. For my brush rabbits that have been mowing my lawn for the last 5 years. For the oak trees outside that I can lean against when I need to just draw some energy back in. Just all those beings that surround me that I can go say hello to. It's very soothing, and I'm a person who very often needs soothing. So,
it's so beautiful. Is there anything you'd change about your life?
Nope. I wish I could do the Edith Piaf song, but I don't have it in me.
Je ne regrette. I can't do anyway. No regrets.
No, there's things that I might have wished different, but what's going to come in 2 years that might use it? I don't know that. I used to have a long list of things that I would change, but I don't know what the future is going to require of me. And there may be still things that are happening now that will make me better suited later. I get worried a lot about the wildfires and the smoke in the air during wildfire season. There's things about the world that I worry about.
What is your greatest concern at the moment about the modern world?
I think it's probably best summarized as the absence of empathy. I think that there's so much emphasis on taking a side or winning a point that there's not a lot of time spent really. I'm not talking about sympathy where you just imagine a perspective so you can argue it, but really feeling what it would be like to be in that other person's place, feeling their worries, living their experience, and looking at how everyone is really struggling to do the best that they can. And sometimes our best is awful. Sorry, sometimes our best is not very good, but it might still be our best. And I think the blaming tends to make things less likely to be resolved, and that practicing empathy is the way to build the bridges needed to help people out. And also, if it turns out that we can't win a better future, but we're engaged in hospice care for that which we love, well, then we'll be much better at hospice care if we can empathize with the others.
I couldn't agree with you more. And what is it that gives you hope then?
Hope is an interesting word. I like to define it differently.
Go on, please do.
I think usually hope is a word that people use about an emotional state pertaining to some linear future in time. We hope something for the future, and we remember or regret things in the past, and we're moving through, and the past is gone and the future is ahead to be won or lost. And I think with that construct of linear time, I find myself very much in league with Tolkien's wood elves and their sense of fighting the long defeat.
Yeah.
I don't see a hope for a brilliant future. I don't see it. I would despair if I did that. So what I try to do, and again, this is not always successful, is I try to use this idea of there being a continuum of space-time. And within space-time, there are all of these, I'll call them a moment, but it's a moment in space and a moment in time. It's a little granule of space-time. And the one I'm in right at this moment, right here, I can burnish that to be like a jewel if I work at it. And then in space-time, there's one more shining moment that it may not be in the future, but it could be held in memory and bring strength in a bad future, right? And so I think I try to focus on being the most intensely me that I can be in the moment, and trying to find a way to create something of beauty or find a new connection that brings some moment of wisdom that could be reflected upon later. Or so it's not, those aren't lost. I don't feel that they're lost. Once they're there, if they're held in memory, then they're there eternally. And then I have the hope that I can burnish one more moment, and that keeps me going.
I like that notion, because I think hope often has us living conditionally.
Mm-hmm.
I hope things will get better, rather than having, like you say, creating or burnishing that jewel right now in the moment. Because I think it's only these moments, and living as fully as we can in these moments, actually have any impact in the future. And I like the way I suppose our present actions do have an impact on the future, but also that you talk about that memory, mm-hmm. holding that memory, and how useful that is. And I know that in my own life in terms of dealing with grief, remembering I'm grieving what I've lost, because what I lost was wonderful, but I'm so grateful for having had that experience. It's that the grief allows me to remember those jewels in my past, for example, rather than I'm now a victim and I'm lost and I'm in pain. But it's actually the reason I grieve is because of those maybe choose your those burnished jewels of the experiences I've had with people, where I have loved and been loved. Those wonderful things that sustain me as I continue my life, that I've had those. And I think that's really, really important. I don't know, is that what you're saying?
It is. And there's, I think, a step beyond that, in that, and I think I am able to do this because every 2 years I lost all my friends. I lost all my teachers. And back when I was growing up, there was no internet. And the people I met were children abroad because their parents were moving about also, and they didn't have a permanent address. So when you left, it was like taking the fist out of a bucket of water. It's gone. All you had is the memories of those times. There was never the possibility of reconnecting. So I think I got a lot of practice of holding in memory the experiences and the people, and they're real in my memory. They're real as if they were here. Some of them speak to me, and I've had a number of very dear friends who have died, but still they're real and they speak to me and they're still here. So if I spend my time grieving about the fact that they're physically no longer in Mexico, like, okay, so she was in Mexico, she wasn't really here anyway, but she's here and she's here.
Yeah.
And so like when we have our ancestors feast, we usually do that in around the autumnal equinox, because that's when our world is the most dead because of fire. Okay. What we do is we have a dinner party and we tell stories from the lives of all these delightful people who are no longer with us, but they are with us as we tell their stories, and we keep them alive in the memory, and we laugh and we joke and so we bring them back to life every year, sitting around the table, drinking, telling the tales, and remembering the craziness and the wisdom that they brought us and the gifts of joy that they brought us. And so in that sense, yeah, we're recalling those little burnished moments, right? And they still live.
And it's lovely, that notion that people are, when I lived in Kenya among the Turkana, that, and I've come across it subsequently, but it was really reassuring to me, because when I was there, my father died, and they believed that you were not dead as long as people still remembered you. And it's that, and I know in other African cultures, the community consists of those who've passed on in the ancestral world that are remembered, those who are here, and those who have yet to be born. Mm-hmm. But that wonderful, bringing to life or animating ancestors through story and shared memories are really, really important. And yes, I think I would agree that that's something that will sustains me going forward, is having those moments. Mm-hmm. There's a quote from Julia Foyle, and I haven't read all of it, so one of my favorite quotes from Brother Odd by Dean Koontz: we yearn for tomorrow and the progress that it represents, but yesterday was once tomorrow, and where was progress in it? Or we yearn for yesterday, for what was and what might have been. And as we are yearning, the present is becoming the past. So the past is nothing but our yearning for second chances. Wonderful, Julia. That's brilliant. And there's something from Floriana, just, going back about empathy. To develop it, we need to learn to feel all emotions, joy as well as pain. And this does not come automatically, especially when we face uncomfortable emotions. But it's the only way to feel ourselves and others, all beings. It's so important to have such a community to help us in this. This gives me hope too. Thank you, Floriana.
Emotions are a whole nother topic, aren't they?
Indeed. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I can hint at it. There's resources, but I can't remember the name of the book right now, but I read this wonderful book that discussed emotions as being ways for our brain to tell us important messages we need to shut up and listen to, and that each emotion is trying to give you a specific kind of message. And once you get the message and act on the message, it'll go away and leave you alone. And that being trapped in any one emotion, the ones we call good or the ones we call bad, are both equally valuable in communicating, right? So a joy is only saying, hey, something good just happened. Look around and see what it is, where it came from, and can you make it happen again in the future? Check that out, like learn from this, right? A fear is saying there might be a danger nearby. Please take a look and see. It might not be true, but pay attention. There might be a danger. Go look. And right, so all of the emotions have some message, and I try to think of them as messengers. Mm-hmm. But that's a whole nother thing. But there's books on that. That's really fascinating to me. I've used
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's when we feel and have emotions, we are alive, regardless of what they are. But we are alive. Great teachers. Sylvain has one. What is she? Oh, hold on a second. Grief at the loss of my wife has been all-consuming. Listening to your take on the past and those precious has really helped. Oh, thank you, Philip.
So glad to hear.
Because my husband died 6 years ago, and so I'm very familiar with grief. But it's the joys of what we had that sustain me, and I think it's really, really important. Thank you for sharing that, Philip. Sylvain, as a young person, and I love the sapling druid, this fireside chat has shed immense amounts of wisdom that will be beneficial to my journey. What a wonderful moment this has been. Thank you so much. That is really kind of you. That is really, really nice. Heather Adams Barnett, this is wonderful. I've learned to listen to my anger as a warning that I need to pay attention to my boundaries.
Yay! There you
go. A wonderful alarm signal. Absolutely. And Sherry says, interesting. I was struggling with the word hope in a fairy garden song I'm working with, and was led to try love for hope, which helped to keep it present and yet still light. That is interesting. So, are you a pacifist?
Not entirely. I think of that as an ism, and I don't think I take such an extreme position. I believe in standing up for what needs to be stood up for, but I believe more in using this concept of soft power.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to build bridges. I like to connect with people and try to empathize with them first. And sometimes that's more difficult than others. Yeah. But I've just found that if there's a strong disagreement in perspectives, if you can connect with a person and ask them from a place of empathy to please explain more and more of the details about their perspective and where it comes from and how they came to it and what it means for them, often you'll find more ability for both yours and their sides to sort of do this dance and try to find a new equilibrium. Whereas a confrontation, in my experience, often leads to people digging in their heels and becoming more entrenched and unwilling to consider the other options. And I'm sure there is some value of people going out and sort of screaming slogans at each other, but that's not the way that I've been able to create any movement. Also, the places that I grew up in, many of them devolved into war shortly after we left. And so
was that anything to do with you?
I really don't want to say. But
sorry, I'm being flippant.
Iran's revolution happened shortly after we left, and the first intifada happened shortly after we left Israel, and the coup happened shortly after we left Venezuela. So I grew up with this sense of, if there's a lot of people with loud noises happening, you calmly and quietly turn around and walk the other way. You go away from it. And it comes from places where there were bus bombings on a regular basis. You just didn't. You found other ways to try to engage in a more calm and predictable environment. So I suppose in part it's fear of angry confrontations. I like being alive.
Fair enough.
But I find I'm better able to help persuade people to rethink their perspectives if there can be an empathetic conversation rather than a confrontation.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I know if somebody attacks me, I'm not talking physically, verbally, and very, very angrily, there's a part of me can go into fear. Oh my God, have I done something wrong? And then there's the other bit. If they're really resentful of my worldview, I just feel that everything breaks down. Where if there's respectful curiosity around diversity and around differences of opinion and a desire to understand in a curiously respectful way, doors are more likely to open than, shutters coming down.
Yeah, it's not guaranteed, but...
No. But I think it
works. You probably need both, to be fair. I mean, I'm just one type of personality, right? So I'm sure that there's occasionally need for real warriors, but I'm not one of them. That's not me.
Well, I think if somebody was attacking my children, I think I would
Yeah,
have a go to
I
protect.
also
I think that the mama bear would come out.
I also have a go at people who are harming themselves through the practice of non-wisdom. So I once
Go on.
a bus stop in Pittsburgh, and it was one of these days where it had been 40 below zero for 2 weeks. And I'm standing at the bus stop, and here's this 30-something-year-old man, his hat hanging out of his pocket, his gloves on the other pocket, and he's going like this, and it's 40 below, and I just laid into him. What the hell is wrong with you? Do you know what your mother would say if she caught you? Do put that hat on your head. I just lost it. I turned red, put his hat on, pulled it over his ears, put his gloves on.
You embodied his mother.
Oh, I did. I pulled the full mother card on him, and but with good, with a smile.
Oh yeah, I mean that's not aggressive. That's being motherly.
He was very startled.
Is there a person in your life that you admire?
There are loads and loads of people that I admire for different things. I don't think there's any one person. There are moments and teachings and wondrous aspects of many people that I will role model off of or admire and try to take pieces. But I've yet to meet a life that is wholly honorable. I've yet to meet a life that is wholly evil, or I don't know if you have the word, but horrid. Even in the worst person, there can sometimes be something that's worthy of commendation. So I try to just meet everyone and learn who they are and see if there's something that they offer that helps me. So that's probably not a good thing. I should have some role model. I suppose an imaginary person, right? So I have these, you can't really see it here, in my altar behind me. No, you can't see it. I have 2 statues of mythical characters. So for some people, these are gods, but for me, they are a kind of archetypal role model. So one of them is Kerninos, who reminds me that I have an obligation of care of all of the wildlands and creatures that are in my realm, and that's a sacred obligation. And the other one is Brigid, who reminds me, in my sense of the importance of using the gifts I have for sort of domesticated, for learning, for healing, for the sort of the human realm of endeavor, and reminding me that I'm obliged to do my best at those kinds of tasks as well, maintaining the home and tending my family and all of that. So, but those aren't, depending on who you are, those may or may not be considered real role models. I don't know if that.
But it's the qualities they have, or the qualities that represent.
Yeah.
And that they remind you, if you think of Cernunnos and looking after the wildlife in your area, it's that. I think that's really, it's interesting that often people we admire, we see them as perfect, and you don't have that you actually see people as and it's true, because people aren't perfect. They may have great qualities but can also be very flawed, or are bad, but are they good? That I think it's great to be able to look at that, because when you have somebody who's contributed something to the arts or to music or done good works, and then you discover some other side to them that isn't so savory, I think it's important not to wipe out all the good they've done because they've done something bad. It's a hard one to navigate.
And I think part of it comes from having to be honest about who I am myself. I am not a saint. I am not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I am quite difficult in many ways, right? But I also can offer some very good things to people. And I just think that you do yourself and everyone else a disservice by presuming anyone is completely on one side or the other. But that's sometimes difficult to stomach. You know, sometimes if you look at something that someone's done that is so horrific to you and you can't move beyond that, well, then their lessons will be lost on you. But sometimes that would be a very sad loss, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a very difficult one, but I think it's very difficult to navigate that on your own. You know, there needs to be a lot of help and support to be able to navigate your way around that. Because I think when you can get to that point, it's very freeing. Then you're can be free from that trauma, or freer, or whatever it is that you've experienced.
Yeah, there's something that came out of my doctoral work in engineering and public policy. There was a lot of decision analysis work in that, and one of the things that we were having to come to grips was that there's no such thing as good or bad policy. There's good for whom in what context. And if you take out the for whom and take out the for what context, then you're having a nonsensible discussion. And I think the same thing applies when you're considering if you're going to judge somebody, which, right, are you judging the person? Or because that's really nonsensible, but you can judge a particular action, or you can judge a particular piece of work that they've done, and then you know what you're talking about. And I think it's sort of the same philosophical approach. Absolutely.
So we're going to come to the end of our time, and my last question, you've already kind of alluded to your favorite season where you live. So there's that piece. And do you celebrate the Wheel of the Year? I mean, I know you have it in your Mount Hemus is all about that. What is your favorite, if you do celebrate the Wheel of the Year, what is your favorite one?
Okay, we absolutely celebrate a Wheel of the Year. In fact, our homeschool calendar is written around that. We have 8 5-week terms.
Oh.
We have 2 weeks off at the quarters and 1 week off at the cross quarters. So we really, but it's based on our ecology, not on the classic one. My favorite season is truly the first flower season, when all the shrubs are awash with flowers.
Oh, when is that?
Company of bees. That happens, it begins around beginning of February.
Okay.
So about the time of Imbolc, everything is flowers and pollinators and yellow-faced bumblebees.
Yeah.
And the whole season delights me. But the holiday that delights me most is actually the one that's moved off the calendar, which is the day of the first measurable fire season ending rain, which is such a powerful relief because all the animals that are still alive have made it. And the air is washed of the smoke and the ash, and the leaves are washed of all of the ash, and they can breathe again. And the grasses will start to come alive again. And so there's this incredible relief and rebirth and regreening. And that day, the minute the first raindrops fall, people scream, rain, rain,
really?
Everything away. We run outside and we dance in the rain and we collect the water. And yeah.
What time of year is that? When is that?
It used to be around the time of Samhain, but it's moved with climate change. Now it happens usually about the time of the American Thanksgiving weekend. So it's the end
of November. Okay.
End of November, really, now. So, but it's celebrated not by the calendar, but it's when we measure it in the rain gauge. That's when we go out and celebrate, and that's my absolute favorite.
it's interesting. I'm going to come back to you about your Wheel of the Year and how you celebrate it. Here, I tend to celebrate ceremonies just at the nearest Sunday to the festival, simply for practical reasons. But there's like, we celebrate Bealtaine, for example, when the first hawthorn comes out. That could be on the 1st of May. It could be sometimes. I've had it on just at the end of April, or the 9th of May, or it's like celebrating it. And then you see what happens. Even though Ireland is a very small country, hawthorn comes in bloom at different places. So where I am, it was later this year than 10 kilometers away in Kilkenny City. So there's that. And I think in the past, our ancestors would have had, it's what's happening in the landscape. So we plant when the first rains happen, or we harvest when, rather than actually an actual date on the calendar. So it's really interesting that, like, of course, you can only celebrate the first rain when the first rain comes.
Mm-hmm. But the rest of it is a little more fungible, I think, for our side. I mean, part of it is you need to have a predictable school schedule. So
Yeah.
So we did need to have that. And most of the other things that we celebrate, it's not as clear as the first measurable rain on our land. That's a moment in time. You know, when around May 1st, we welcome the great fog bank of summer, and we take a week off, and somewhere in there we go down to the coast and wave hello and all that. But when is that really here? So we have our ridges, right? And so is that when you see the first finger of fog that actually spills over? Or is it when the first valley is completely full? Or is it the first time the house gets socked in? There's a range of when you could technically call it fog season has arrived, right? So we can do as you do, right? And celebrate that nearest Sunday or whenever we can get people together. Same thing with the flower seasons, right? Similar thing. Wildfire season we used to do by calendar, but for us, the welcome to the wildfire season is actually a preparatory series of it's not a ceremony in a circle with prayers. It's get the bug out bags packed, make sure that the canned food that's going in the car with the bug out bags is fresh, make sure that the emergency water supply is cycled and refilled. It's all this being ready for
an evacuation if you have.
Yeah. So that we've started, it used to be we would do it during that August 1st time period. And now we've started our preparations midsummer, because last year we had this unbelievable dry lightning storm the first weekend of August. And they had something like 1,000 new wildfires sparked in one night. It was unbelievable. And we had one that was lit down the hill from us, raced up the hill. They stopped at about 1.5 blocks as the crow flies from our house. And we were the first house that we were told we would need to bug out. And we had the car packed and pointed out. And the police said, please wait in your house. It's not your turn to go yet. And by the time it was our turn to go, they said, okay, they put it out where you're fine. But so with that in mind, we were packing earlier and earlier, which is making Irish weather look really good.
I'm conscious you use the word bug out. And I thought, are you talking about bugs? So,
where does that come from? Is that
bug out? Yeah, at first I thought you were talking about bugs, and then I realized, oh no, you mean packing up and getting out.
I think that comes from the old television show MASH.
Oh, really?
When, they have one of the episodes I thought was called Bug Out, and it's about the enemy's coming, pack up the MASH unit and go now.
Oh, that's the bug. I used to love MASH.
With that kind of anxiety attached, yeah. So.
Well, Larisa, it's been such a joy talking to you. Absolutely. And the comments are just, thank you so much for this amazing session. Blessings to all. We've had a lovely, lovely response to your comments. So I want to thank you so much for being my guest. I've really, really enjoyed it. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and hang in there, and I'll because
Very good. Thank
okay,
you so much. It's been a pleasure.
great. So thank you all for joining our conversation this evening, and for your wonderful comments. And Larisa and I will go over them now and have a look. It's been great to have you. So I look forward to seeing you next week for another Fireside Chat. And in the meantime, enjoy whatever weather you have. I'm really, really enjoying mine. Because Irish summers are not always great. So I will wish you all a good week, and slán go fóill until we see you next week. Okay, bye-bye till then.